Hello. I have a problem in that I can't read a book that features brioche buns and pastries and freshly baked bread without starting to feel really hungry. And there are lots of such vivid descriptions in Sophie Mackintosh's quite short, very mysterious novel, Cursed Bread. It might be dangerous to eat these things, but there are lots of really luscious descriptions of these edibles throughout the book. And so before sitting down to make this video, I got myself a cardamom bun and made myself a cup of tea to enjoy while talking about my thoughts about it, because I ended up feeling quite conflicted about this novel. I'm not really sure entirely how I feel about it. It has grown on me a bit more the more time has gone by, but reading it, and especially the middle part of the book, I found quite frustrating. I think my reaction to it has been slightly modified because of my expectations about what I was going to read. And I think that's always really interesting when your reading experience is changed by the expectations when you go into the book and maybe you don't get exactly what you were expecting or hoping for, and that changes your feelings about it. So this novel is told from the point of view of Elodie, who is quite a self-effacing, dowdy baker's wife from a provincial French village that is still feeling the effects of World War II. It takes place after that, but you still feel the reverberations of this like throughout the village and amongst the people, but you don't actually get her account from when she is living in this village. You get it from a time afterwards in another place when you're made to understand a big tragic event has occurred, and she is narrating this what happened in retrospect in this village between her husband and between this glamorous ambassador's wife named Violet, who she becomes friends with, becomes slightly obsessed with. And the novel starts, because you're getting her first person account and her memories, you're kind of questioning, like, should you really trust her? And she says in the very beginning that she's not always very trustworthy in what she says, but that she's going to try to be truthful in this account. So I'm not sure if the details we get throughout it can be entirely believed, but I don't think that is exactly the point of this book, because what really comes through in her narration is her bitterness. This is a character who is really bitter and really clinging to these feelings of bitterness, of love and desire, which wasn't reciprocated by the people around her, and that she wasn't allowed to become the person that she wanted to be. So she is clinging and gnawing on these feelings from the past, her experiences, and she is using this self-effacing, increasing levels of debasement that she went through as the tools for her discovering her own sense of agency. And I think it's really interesting and effective how this novel does that and conveys that sense and feeling throughout the book. And she almost comes across to me like this Jean Rhys character. If you've read any of Jean Rhys's novels, her early novels, not Wide Sargasso Sea, although partly Wide Sargasso Sea, but there's a definite character type amongst Jean Rhys novels of these women who have had affairs and been let down, that are just kind of drifting around and very bitter and obsessing over their memories of the past. There's a line in this novel that I loved and I thought was very revealing, in which she says, I've always been a sort of archivist, glutting myself on what has been left behind. And I think this really shows her personality as someone that really desires people, who wants love and sex, but also sort of desires to become them, that she wants to consume and envelop herself in these people's existence around her. She's often just kind of watching them from the sides and spying on them, often without their knowledge. And so you get this sense of this obsessive personality. She makes increasingly desperate attempts to sexually entice her husband, who is just not interested in being with her anymore. You feel the real heartbreak of this, although it's quite sweet and funny that her husband has this really drive to want to create the perfect loaf of bread. Elodie also wants to be intensely close to and become the character of Violet. But as the novel goes on, it becomes evident that Violet isn't so interested in Elodie as becoming either a companion or a confidant, but that's someone that she can manipulate for her own churlish amusement. And you see this power play between Violet and her ambassador husband and Elodie, and there are a number of exchanges between them which are quite tense and suspenseful, but also mysterious, especially in what Elodie witnesses between Violet and her husband. There's a scene where she witnesses Violet, her neck being held and choked by her husband, but not so much that he's actually strangling her, but holding her in a very threatening way. And so you get the sense of this danger that women are in. And I don't know if Sophie Mackintosh intended this at all, but when I read this section, I instantly started thinking of that famous incident from several years ago when there were those horrible, really upsetting pictures of Nigella Lawson being held by the throat by her husband, and they were splashed all over the tabloids. It was really awful to see, but that's instantly what it made me think about. And there is an enigma throughout the book as the roles of perpetrator and victim seem to change back and forth, and it maintains this sense of tension through to the book's quite thrilling conclusion. And I don't think you're meant to know any clear answers about who was the perpetrator of these crimes, or if there indeed was a perpetrator of the crimes, because people in the village, they become increasingly hysterical and more violent things occur amongst the villagers. And maybe I wasn't reading it closely enough. I'd love to know if your thoughts, if you've read this book, if you felt like you came to any firm conclusions about what happened or who was at fault. I think you could make the case for a number of different conclusions, but like I said, I don't think Sophie Mackintosh is so interested in solutions in this book, but more portraying the consciousness of this woman who is holding on to the past and this bitterness so tightly. Elodie quite masochistically declares at one point that pain becomes an animal walking at your side. Pain became a home you can carry with you. I'm gonna take a quick break for a bite and a sip. So good. So like I said, I did appreciate and thought it was interesting the tone of the narrative of this book. But I did get quite frustrated with it, especially about midway through, where the circuitous nature of the narrative meant that we become increasingly detached from any clear timeline. I mean, it does sort of follow events forward through to a certain conclusion, but you get so many details just like scattered around in between these descriptions of the past that these details kind of evaporate quite quickly, and I don't feel like they entirely come together. And I think that is partly in the structure of the book, or maybe it was my expectations of it as a kind of fable, as it's described in the description of the book, and which I was definitely expecting because of her previous novel, The Water Cure, her first novel, which I did really enjoy and I thought was really effective overall. And I think because of the setting of that, which was kind of detached from any like concrete reality, whereas this is more rooted in the past. And we find out at the end with a very brief line that this is based on or inspired by a real historical incident that occurred in a village in France in the mid 20th century, where a lot of the villagers went hysterical and died, and it's not entirely known what occurred. And I just feel like it doesn't completely work as a book, either as a fable or a kind of work of historical fiction, in that the conclusion and way it comes together isn't really satisfying, and especially not the reading experience of it, where the mystery of it feels a bit too drawn out. I got quite frustrated by it, that it was being like intentionally elusive, and it's funny because in the present time, when she's like narrating back on this, policemen come to visit Elodie a number of times and they never get any clear answers from her, and I sort of felt like those policemen, that I was a bit frustrated like that. And so maybe that was intentional, and like I said, I don't think we were supposed to get any clear answers, but because this is based on a real historical incident, I wanted that more from the book. And I think it's so interesting that the author or the publisher chose to put at the very end of the book that this is based on a historical account, which is the complete opposite from another Women's Prize long-listed book, Maggie O'Farrell's The Marriage Portrait, and which is a historical novel which begins with a declaration of what the historical figure and incident that it is based on, and then the novel goes on from there to explain forward, whereas in this book it's given at the very end. And I really didn't know that this was based on a historical incident or not, and maybe they wanted to leave that to the very end to reveal, and then you could think back on what you've just read and reconsider it. And I hope that isn't a spoiler that I'm telling this, but other people have been describing this book as, you know, based on this historical incident from this French village. So I did enjoy how this novel reveals her private obsessions, which she really nurtures over a period of time. And I thought it was most effective when it shows how other characters realize and understand that she has these private obsessions, and they use them as tools in which to manipulate her and use her in various ways. I think this shows the real vulnerability of someone that is so fixed in her own perspective. She can't see until much after the fact that people are using her in this way, or that she is allowing herself to be used in this way. I think people who are quite selfish and manipulative can do this, can draw people that have this kind of mentality into traps, to be used and abused. Because Elodie is so naive and so little empathy is extended towards her, it's no wonder that she grows so acidic towards other people and potentially dangerous. So it is really interesting how Sophie Mackintosh draws us into the psychological tension of this account. But like I said, on a whole, I'm not sure if it entirely worked for me. And even though it is such a short book, there was a period where I felt like it was kind of dragging a bit, and I feel like if it's going to be a short book, the prose needs to be really, really tight. And yeah, there were just so many bits of this narrative that I felt like flew off in all directions. But I have read other reviews that thought this is really effective, that it's Sophie Mackintosh's strongest book yet. So I'd be really interested to know, if you have read this book, what you think about it. Do you agree with me? Do you have a different understanding or interpretation of this book than I have? Or if you're interested in reading this book now, or maybe if you're not interested in reading this book, please let me know about that in the comments below. I'd love to discuss it, because yeah, I think there's a lot to chew over in this novel, if you forgive my horrible pun. But yeah, I'm gonna stop now and go away and finish my cardamom bun and my cup of tea. But thank you for watching, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye bye.